the Arch Gaming Network is proud to bring you this board game review. Now here's your host, Sean Smith.
Hello, and thank you for stopping by. Today, we're going to take a look at the game Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, designed by Toby Ho and published by Gray Fox Games. Now, in Deception, a murder has taken place in Hong Kong. You and your other investigators are going to try to solve the mystery of this murder by trying to deduce the means of the murder and figure out a key piece of evidence that was left at the scene. The only problem is that the murder is among the investigators. The forensic scientist will be giving the investigators clues, but the murderer will surely be trying to add some confusion. So, will you be perceptive enough to be able to figure out the clues and the means of murder? Or, if you're the murderer, will you be able to steer the investigators away from you? Well, let's find out about how to play the game, and then I'll come back and give you my thoughts on the other side. Okay, to set up Deception, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pull this forensic scientist and murderer card. And then we're set up for a 5-player game, so then we would grab an additional 3 investigator cards for a total of 5 cards. We would shuffle those up, deal them out, and then we would whoever is the forensic scientist would then reveal her card. The rest of the players will take a look at their card so that they know whether or not they are the murderer or an investigator. Now in the game you have 2 different types of cards. These blue cards here are considered the method or means of the death. So a towel was used, or death by radiation, or pesticide, metal chain, you get it. And then you have some key pieces of evidence. I did not set this up, but panties were at the evidence, or at the scene, dust, an IOU note, toolbox, etc. The forensic scientist is going to give each player 4 of these means of death cards, the blue ones, and 4 of the red ones, which are clue cards. And then the players are going to orient them in front of them, facing towards the center of the table, within easy sight of all of the players. The forensic scientist is then going to give each player one of these clue tokens. This badge allows you to take 1 guess during the game. Just keep in mind that when the forensic scientist is passing out these clue and means cards, she doesn't get any of those cards. Now, what I'm about to say is not in the rule books, but we do it in our games, and I think it's a good idea to do. At this point, once all of the cards are out, all of the players should take a minute to just study all of the other cards that are on the table. You know, just kind of get up and everybody inspect all the cards so everyone knows what everybody has. The reason that we do this in our games is because the murderer's job is to pick 2 of these cards, okay? And a strategy that the murderer can use to throw off the investigators is to pick cards that might be similar in nature to some of the other cards. By having all the players at the same time take a look at all of the cards, it allows the murderer to be able to do this without being noticed or it being too obvious. Again, that's not in the rule book, but it's something that we found that is helpful, especially, we're just set up for 5 players, but if you're set up with 7, 8, 9 or more players, it gets really difficult to see all of the different cards that are out there. The object of the game is for the murderer to pick 2 cards that only the forensic scientist knows about. And then the forensic scientist is going to be giving clues based on these clue cards we're about to go over. And then everybody at the table is going to try and figure out what are the 2 clues that the murderer has used. Nobody knows who the murderer is, so we're trying to figure out what evidence is associated with the murderer to capture him. In our example, we are the murderer. Yes. So at this point, the forensic scientist is going to have everybody close their eyes. Then she's going to say, "Murderer, wake up. Murderer, pick 2 clues." Now, I am going to pick the flyer and the shipping container. So I would point to these 2. Then the forensic scientist would tell the murderer to close his eyes and then to have everybody wake up. At this point, the forensic scientist will put out the cause of death. There's only one cause of death card in the game, so you can put that out really at any time. But then you have these green ones, and they are locations of the crime. All right, you will shuffle them up and pick one at random. You don't get to choose which one to put out. Then you have these scene cards. So there are a lot more of those, and they're kind of the orange cards. What day, the day of the crime, the hint on the corpse, trace at the scene, duration of the crime, okay, corpse condition. So what you're going to do is shuffle these up, and again, you don't get to pick which ones you put out, and you're just going to put out 4 at random and put the rest of these off to the side. The forensic scientist is going to get the 6 bullets, and now you're really ready to get into the meat of the game. Okay, the forensic scientist's job is to give clues based on these 6 cards. You will take, as the forensic scientist, one of these bullets and put them on a card next to one clue. You can only have 1 bullet per card, and you can put the clue on any card that you want to start with, and you can give out the clues at any speed that you want. I could put one here, wait a little bit, put one here, wait a little bit, put one here. Okay, let's get in a little closer to take a look at these different clue cards. The forensic scientist is going to be giving out 6 clues, one based on the cause of death, the location of the crime, what was noticed by a bystander, the day of the crime, the state of the scene, and the weather. Now, something you're probably going to notice is that based on the clues that are on these cards, they may not always match up with the clues or where you're trying to point the investigators. Remember, our forensic scientist is trying to get the players to guess these 2 clues, the flyer and the shipping container. Because remember, the goal of the game is to guess what the 2 cards are, not who the murderer is. Yes, by guessing the 2 cards, you'll know who the murderer is, but that's not the goal of the game. So as I said, the forensic scientist can put a clue out on any of these cards, again, 1 per card. So let's look at the cause of death. It took place in a shipping container. So loss of blood, severe injury, illness, disease, poisoning, accident. Maybe suffocation is the best clue on this card. So maybe the forensic scientist will put down suffocation. So you'll put the bullet on that word. Now, at this point, all of the players, investigators and the murderer, can start looking at everybody's cards to try and figure out which one best matches suffocation. Looking at one of the other players, they have a rope. Well, certainly that could be suffocation. So the murderer may try to point people in that person's direction, while other people may be saying, well, you could suffocate in a shipping container. So there'll be some back and forth, and it's up to the forensic scientist to decide when to put out the next clue. Obviously, you don't want to take up a lot of time, but give them enough time to be able to discuss the different clues. You need to know, if you are the forensic scientist, you cannot say anything. You cannot say anything. You cannot make motions or gestures or grunt or or you cannot make a sound. The only thing that you can do is put clues on these cards, and you have to do it silently. So let's say we'll go move on to noticed by bystander. Well, if somebody was in a shipping crate for a while, maybe a bystander noticed the smell. Okay? Location of the crime. Was it a pub, a bookstore, a restaurant, a hotel, a hospital, or a building site? Well, none of the clues are perfect, but of what we have, building site is probably the closest that you're going to get. Again, you're trying to get them to pick up on flyer and on shipping container. The day of the crime. Was it a weekday, a weekend, spring, summer, autumn, winter? Well, shipping containers can be a work-related thing, so maybe it was a weekday. The state of the crime. Well, you have, there were bits and pieces at the crime, ashes, water stain, cracked, disorderly, tidy. Well, you could go a couple ways here. A flyer could be torn into bits and pieces, so you might want to choose that. A shipping container could be near water, so you may want to go with that. Let's go with water stain. And then what was the weather? Was it stormy, sunny, dry, humid, cold, hot? Well, you mentioned the state of the scene. There was water stains. I don't want people, as if I'm the forensic scientist, to think that it was stormy or humid, and that's why there were water stains. So maybe I would say dry. Again, it's not always easy to pick a clue as a forensic scientist, because your choices sometimes don't add up to what you're trying to get people to pick. So throughout this whole process, everybody at the table is going to be discussing, based on the clues that the forensic scientist picked, what are the two cards? What are the most likely two cards? Now, at some point, the forensic scientist will now call for a summation, and that will give every player about 30 seconds, that usually is the best, to say what two cards they think it is. And this cannot be, you cannot interrupt this person when they're giving their 30-second presentation or summation of who they think it is. Each player will be given a chance to do this, and then once everyone has had a chance, we'll move on to round 2. This game is played over 3 rounds. Now at this point, the forensic scientist can replace one of these 4 scene cards. Okay? One of these 4. Again, you have these extra ones here, and you'll pick out, more than likely, it's really the forensic scientist's choice of which one to do, but you're going to pick out the one, presumably, that was probably the least helpful. So maybe we get rid of weather, okay? And just put it off to the side. And then you retain the bullet. You're then, at random, going to choose another card. This one says sudden incident. Was there a power failure, fire, conflict, loss, valuables, scream, or vomiting? You have to choose one of them. So as a forensic scientist, maybe you will put down, I don't know, it may be scream or loss of valuables. And the reason I say loss of valuables is, again, because you do have to try and get them to think of flyer as well. So maybe the flyer was mentioning some things that were stolen or had been lost. So scream, of course, would be maybe the person screamed before they were murdered, but I'm going to try loss of valuables. Now, once again, all the players will get to decide or talk about that new clue and any other clues. They just take turns talking about it, and then the forensic scientist will once again call for a summation. Each player will get a turn to do that, and then you'll have one more round. Maybe we get rid of that one, and one more at random. The corpse's condition. All right. Was it still warm, stiff, decayed, incomplete, intact, or twisted? Eek. Well, we're going to assume that maybe being in that shipping container, maybe it was decayed. All right. So now you have all of these clues that are out there. All of the players are taking a look around at the various clues. Again, they're continuing to try and figure out what are the two cards that are in play here. So how do people make an accusation? Well, as I said, each player has one of these little badges. And this badge allows them at any time. It could be after the very first clue was ever placed. It could be at the very first round. Or it could be the second or third round. Whenever a player decides that they want to take a guess, they will turn this into the forensic scientist. The accuser then is going to say, I think it is, and then they'll name two cards. I think it's container and raincoat. The forensic scientist only has two options. They can either say yes or no. If both clues are not correct, the forensic scientist must say no. Even though one of them is correct, if both aren't correct, it's a no. Now, that player who made the incorrect guess, they're not out of the game. They can continue to play and deliberate with all the other players. They just can't make an official guess any longer. Now, after the third round clue has been established and the players have had time to talk about it, the forensic scientist will ask for summations again. If the murder has not been caught by the end, or the two cards have not been figured out, by the end of all the summations, then the murderer gets away with it and wins the game. The other way is that if all of the investigators have used all of their guesses and have not caught the murderer, then the murderer wins the game. However, if one of the investigators is able to pick off the two correct cards, the murderer is caught and will spend the rest of his life in jail. Anyway, that is how you play deception. Okay, so deception, murder in Hong Kong. It's a very fascinating game. I do have to say, though, as far as the title, Murder in Hong Kong, there really isn't much of a theme here, or an Asian theme or Hong Kong theme to it. It's really just in the name. Once you start playing, it really has nothing to do with Hong Kong at all. So, I mean, there's some, I think that's Chinese writing on here, but I mean, other than that, there is really no theme in relation to Hong Kong. So, that doesn't really matter, because you're not playing this game for the theme. You're playing this game because it is an awesome social deduction game. The game has such an interesting format. It's fun to be an investigator. It's fun to be the murderer. It's fun to even be the forensic scientist who doesn't have to say, or really can't say anything throughout the whole game. The back and forth of the deliberating is really fun, and being able to go back and forth with someone and go, oh, it sounds like you're the murderer. Oh, no, you're the murderer, and those are the cards, why. It's so interesting. And as the forensic scientist, sometimes on these cards, you don't really have a good clue that matches, the key evidence or the means of the murder. So there's such a nuance there, because you have these players deliberating and you can't really say anything, but you know that there really isn't something on the card that is helpful. all of it adds to the enjoyment. I will say that the game plays 4 to 12 players. I don't think it plays very well with 4. I would probably never play it with 4. 5 is okay. I think 6 to 8 players is the sweet spot. We didn't cover the additional roles like the accomplice or the witness. And if you are going to play with 9 or more players, you might want to look at bringing those in along with the extra tiles that you can play with as well. It also helps the replayability of this game. Now the game comes with a lot of these cards. If I had any issue with the card or with the game, is that these cards are too small. Okay, they're tiny. That can be problematic if you're playing 5 or 6 or 7 players. It's probably not as big of an issue, but if you're playing with a larger group and you have all these cards around the table, it can get hard for people to see all of the different cards that are out there on play, and you end up with a lot of people standing up and really hunching over the table to try and see everything. I wish they would have made the cards maybe, at least, playing card size. So that's really the only complaint I have with the game. The components are really nice. The scene cards, good, solid. They should hold up very well. The components as far as the badges are okay. Having the bullets, I think, is a nice touch. They're a good wooden component. And I think the artwork is really good as well. So this game is really fun. The caveat being that you do want to play this with people that don't mind bluffing. It plays well with strangers. It plays well with a group that you know. That's not really an issue, but you need people who do want to enjoy that social aspect of the games. One thing when I play a game like this, or Resistance, or Werewolf, I love to get up and talk, and whether I'm, the quote murderer or the werewolf or whatever it is, I'm always up talking, and so much so that some people always say, well, boy, you sure are talking a lot. You must be the murderer, you must be the werewolf, whatever it is. But the way I look at these games is I get into them. I love the social aspect of them. And I think you have to have somebody as a catalyst to really get the discussion going, because if you do have a group that is hesitant about getting up and discussing or bluffing or whatever, you may have a hard time with this game. But I would say of all the times we've played it, that's never been a problem. So this is a great game. It's a good party game. It's a great social deduction game, and I certainly recommend it. I give this game a 10. Now, if you like this review, please take a moment to hit the like button below. Also, subscribe to our channel. Check out some of the other reviews, and leave some comments below if you would, please. Once again, I want to thank you for stopping by.
Thank you for visiting the Arch Gaming Network. For more great content, check us out at archgamingnetwork.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook.